Well, without further ado, let me introduce you. Let me introduce Amber Twitty. Now I'm having a, okay. Amber Twitty, who is Extension Educator, Community Economic Development at Central State University. Amber is a management professional who has worked in all aspects of community development and planning projects, from building housing, highways organizations, and community blocks to help people move towards self-sufficiency. She has worked with communities, both large and small, in the areas of capacity building, diversity and inclusion, organizational development, grants administration, leadership development, program development and evaluation, neighborhood business districts, stakeholder outreach, academia, governments, and private sectors. So as you can see, or as you can hear, Amber has a lot of experience in working with communities of all types, all sizes. And so Amber, we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Marshall. But as always, you know, when you're in the community economic development space, you do a little bit of everything, right? And you're just in real time. And I'm just a pleasure to be here. So without further ado, we'll get into it. But with that, that was the shortened version, right, of all the different things that I've done. And I've been able, the blessing is I've been able to apply it to extension, right? So those who know me know I've been in community economic development stuff for over 30 years. However, I've been in extension, just have my 3rd year anniversary on September 1st. So with that, I've been able to take best practices from other industries, general business, and just community development and apply it to extension. And today, our focus is on outreach strategies, right? And sometimes I think in extension and just academia in general is very linear, is research-based, but in outreach is people-based, right? And you adjust based on what people are doing at that time, what their needs are, and then those change and people change their minds and you have to adjust with it. So before I get into the actual topic today, I always like to start off with what is community and economic development, given a baseline definition. And with that, community and economic development is how we live, how we work, how we play, how we thrive, and everything that we do to navigate all of the aforementioned. So that is a big term. You know, it's 3 words. It's a big term like diversity, but it touches on everything that we do in our lives. And so our role as a CED professional is to look at that whole system and see how we can plug and play to make a part of a system better, to increase access, to innovate, whatever is needed. So with that being said, our role is not to dictate. So even though we might have to be a master of many different things, it's our role is to work with the communities, not dictate to the communities, right? So you have ebbs and flows. And with that, today I wanted to talk about reach, teach, and engage. So let's break down those 3 words. The first thing is reaching. You have to identify your audience. Who do you plan to serve, right? With different projects that we do in extension, there are different audience that we intend to serve, whether that's youth, whether those are ex-offenders, also known as returning citizens, whether it's that rural grocery store owner, whether it's the urban ag or the family unit, and anything in businesses that serve and organizations that serve those. And so you really have to get to know who your target audience is, because then you'll know how to communicate to that audience. So you have to get to know your community, and knowing your community, and that's all caps for know, K-N-O-W, know your community. And it goes beyond census and community data, right? It's not just community survey data, not just census data. They'll give you some general stuff, but you really have to get to know the community. And how do you get to know that? Is being visible in the community. So to give you an example, and I mean being regularly visible. So there was a project out in Portsmouth, Ohio. And for those who are not familiar with Ohio, Portsmouth is located on the southeastern part of the state, which is part of the Appalachian Mountain systems, right? And so, um, and it's mainly Caucasian Appalachia as far as the demographics. It's about 2% of everybody else. And so they know when I come in the community. So when I came in the community, they're looking at me. I went in a Family Dollar. I'm being followed in the store. I'm just buying some candy, but I'm being followed. And I said, this is a place I'm going to be regularly visible. So every day I live in Cincinnati, which is about 2 hours, 2.5 hours from Portsmouth. And I had to commute there 3 days a week. And so every day before I went into the trailer, which was the office, because it was a construction project, I went to that same store around the same time every time I went to Portsmouth. So after doing that for about 2 weeks, and I bought the same candy. I didn't eat all the candy though, because I would have had a cavity. But I I I went into there, and by the second week, the lady says, "Are you part of that new highway project?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Well, what is your role?" And I said, "Well, I'm the diversity and equity and inclusion consultant on the project." And they said, "Oh, okay." And then she asked a couple questions. And then she started saying, "Oh, are you getting your usual candy today?" I said, "I sure am." And so that started a conversation, right? So then after that, I didn't go as often. I went about once a week, got the same thing. But then she would say, "Well, I got some questions." So we started having questions and answer sessions about the project. And I asked, "Well, what else would you like to know?" And so I would tell her different things that were going on, updates on the project. She became an informal leader, and I'll touch base back on that again. Um, and so she became an informal leader. She became an informal influencer because I could give her information. She would take that back to the community, and her community would come back with more questions. I would let them know when outreach events were. So even though it went out in the newspaper and the formal things, this was my grassroots efforts of reaching out to the community. And so that is being regularly visible. And that's one way to create an influencer. But when you also want to identify or reach out to the community, you also got to find out who the leaders are, who are the players, right? The leaders are informal. So you have the universities, the businesses, the organizations, the agencies. But who is that auntie, the candy lady? Who is the one that's always in everybody's business? So you ask around and then you engage that person, right? And to give you an example, just on my street where I grew up on, there was Mr. Dunlap, and we called him the mayor of Queen Crest Avenue because he knew everything. But you could find out information, but you could also give them information. So that's a way to build trust because they're going to verify what you say, but those little conversations builds trust and it also builds visibility. Another way to get to know your community is just going to community meetings, whether it is a um, a community council meeting, whether it's a development meeting, whether it's just an outreach event. It's okay to be a fly on the wall and just sit there and listen and observe, right? Um, but you're still being visible on a regular basis. You're being regularly visible. Um, Another way that you can create influencers and leaders in the community, and this is building up your network. These are the bases of building up your informal community network, is you reach out to some of those people you've identified and say, what are your needs? What are things that are going on in the community? And they'll start talking to you, long as you listening and not trying to overpower the conversation. So this leads us into engaging. And that's mainly leveraging relationships, right? But let's go back. Let's go back to teaching. And then I'll go back to engaging. So in teaching, it's not only teaching what you know, but it's also knowing the how and the why, right? Why are you even out in the community in the first place? What are your goals? What are the needs and wants of those communities, right? And then you have to really pay attention to the language and how people interact with each other. So going back to the Portsmouth area, it is the greater Portsmouth area is 6 counties, right? And but it's still a tight-knit rural area. And so many relatives in one county live in the other county. You have the police chief in one county who's the cousin of the fire chief in the other county. So knowing that, you know that when I go out there, I know that I can't just go to Scioto County when I'm communicating something. I got to make sure that I'm communicating to those leaders, those informal and formal leaders, what's going on, even if I'm just working in Scioto County. So they won't feel left out and say, well, why aren't you talking to us over here, right? So that's part of knowing how to communicate and why you're communicating. And teaching is also learning. So not only are you knowing your what, your why, and your how, and in the business thing, we call that the golden circle with Adam Sinnett. And you can find him on YouTube, and he focuses a lot on that. But this is applicable to teaching as well, especially with that how. What is your competitive advantage to teaching? One of the things on our CED team, we talk a lot in the we do a lot of teaching in the business sector, in the entrepreneurship and business development space. And one of the things that we do is we have to learn what those businesses are, learn about them, right? And they have nuggets of things that they've learned and they're sharing. So teaching is also learning. And you have to make that an environment where you're doing both, right? So you're not only teaching, but you're learning. Your competitive advantage in that business space is with the technology, a lot of businesses, people can just Google stuff. We don't want to just give them the stuff that they can Google easily. That's no added value. So there's no competitive advantage. There's no competitive advantage to that at all. So you have to um, know the how. You have to be committed to challenging yourself, dare to be different, do something differently. So that is the basis of our Entree to Entrepreneurship program. Now, our Entree to Entrepreneurship program, our Ready, Set, Grow programming, which targets the business community, we use that to not only teach in class, but also to continue to engage and have impact beyond the classroom. And so that is part of our competitive advantage. We work with the businesses to come up with ways to address and solve issues. We work to connect business to business, building that peer-to-peer, as academia may say. And then we work to collaborate to continue that impact well beyond that initial thing. And then part of that teaching is almost like a trainer model, right? If you're teaching this business, your business will hopefully teach someone else, and you're building that platform for that. And so that is a lot of your teaching. Another part of teaching in outreach is teaching your own peers, right? So I need to bring Ambrose with me, and I also saw Punta with me when I'm out in the community, so they can see how I do outreach, so that I can connect them. So right now in real time, I have to teach Kunta my how I engage with people, because he's taken over a region now that he's joining our team. And so we want to make sure it's seamless service to the community, so that therefore, we're going to be working together so that it be a smooth transition and service. So it's teaching, it's engaging, knowing the channels on how you're going to teach and engage. And now that leads to the final part, which is the engaging piece. And that is the key to engaging is leveraging relationships. So through the teaching, through the reaching, you have built up a pool of relationships, and then you use that to continually engage the community. So one of the ways to do that is through collaboration, right? And that's partnering, whether it's internal, meaning other departments in your organization, or if it's through committee work. So to give you an example, it's one of me, I have 10 counties, but through those committees, I'm able to expand my reach, right? And teach um, within those spaces because of those relationships. So to give you an example, I am on the advisory committee of the African American Chamber of Commerce that serves Northern Kentucky and Cincinnati, Ohio, Greater Cincinnati, Ohio area, and also Southeast Ohio area. And through those relationships and being on that committee, got to plan. So I got to influence how some programming was done. Let's change it, not look like everything else. Let's adapt to what the community is saying that they need. And then we actually got to teach. And because of that teaching during that major event, now I have other inquiries and people who are coming to other programming that we're doing because I've reached, I teach, and then I reached out, I taught, and then I engaged, right? And then the engagement isn't a one-piece thing. It's a continual thing that you do throughout the life of in your role, right? And so with those committees, now we're working out how we can impact as a group a larger area. So we're taking 10 people, 10 different organizations, but we have reached over in just 2 or 3 events over thousands of people. And then we're doing it in a managed way because now we're rolling them into other activities. So just remember when you're engaging, it's a continual thing. It's being present. It's being present on a regular basis. It's also looking at impact. So it's not a check in the box. You have to have some kind of ROI for the person that you're engaging with, right? And it can't just be self-serving because if you're not authentic, you're going to lose people. So um, when you regularly engaging, the people turn around and they regularly engage you as well as bringing in more people for you to engage. So you're leveraging your time, you're working smarter, not harder, and then you continue on like that. So I'm going to pause a minute to see if there are any questions or stories that anyone would like to share.
Amber, there's a statement in the chat from Vicky, and it says, our reach may need to be diverse as each target audience can be diverse that you are attempting to reach at a given time. That is what she is finding particularly challenging. Do you have a story or a strategy that you've used for maybe a target audience that you found particularly challenging?
Okay, I'll give you 2 stories. So, and I'll use Portsmouth a lot because I work out there a lot now, but this was something that I had to develop the first year I started working out there. Like I said, it's predominantly white Appalachian, right? I'm African American, so they know when I'm driving in the county, when I enter the county, right? The projects that I worked out there and initiatives, it was usually just me. So I'm in a community and I grew up in the urban area in the city of Cincinnati, right? So I'm going into an area that culturally is different, demographically is different as far as race. But what I did was I listened and I focused on what they were saying and what their needs were. So you start with that common ground area. What is your need, right? What is it that you want? Now let's see between your wants and needs how I can help you level up to the next level of what you want to accomplish. How can we expand your footprint or reach if you're in a business? So it's not, you really don't have to worry to me about being different as long as you're listening and asking them what they need. And they gave me a whole list of things. And then we started mapping out and planning what can we do together? And now with an extension, and by doing that, I am now part of a group that meets monthly, and it's 15 different agencies that serve the Adams County, which is one of the larger rural counties. And we continue to work on different issues and things that they need that way. Another thing is when you in these spaces, you are dealing with people's traumas. You are dealing with their past experiences. A lot of times they mistrust agencies, the government, the universities. So with all of that, they are very emotionally attached to whatever their issue is, right? Or whatever they want. So that takes a lot of patience, because sometimes you're like, I didn't do it, but they're coming at you like that, but they're really not coming at you as an individual. They're expressing their frustration. So in those cases, you have to listen. It's really about listening and then repeating what, kind of paraphrasing what they said to make sure you understand. And then you start the conversation there. So you have to have some empathy. So listening, empathy, listening, or more empathy. And then you can start to suggest different ways or strategies. And then they'll say, yeah, let's do that. Then you can take a deeper dive. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. I guess I was thinking more like when you're trying to talk to a whole large group, and within that group, maybe you have elders and you have, unlike where you're working right now, you have a more diverse group ethnically or culturally. And sometimes it's difficult, and also level of interest and knowledge that group brings, it varies. And so sometimes it's difficult to keep everybody engaged.
Yeah, but once again, it's listening. And when you have larger groups, you just pause the conversation and say, okay, these are the things I want to make sure that I understand. You put the onus back on yourself. And you said this and you said this. Am I understanding you correct? And they'll both will say yes or no. That's how you kind of keep everybody engaged when you have larger groups.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Another example is a lot of times when you're dealing with communities, like I said, they're very passionate about their communities. So I was in a inner city community, and I say inner city because most of the people look like me, right? I actually knew half of the people just from growing up because I grew up near that neighborhood. And uh, it was a very demographics as far as age, social demographics. Some were business owners, some were that candy lady that was in the neighborhood all her life. The mom, the single mom, the parents. I mean, it was just everybody, right? And in this community, there were a lot of needs that needed to be addressed. And they had three main community groups. They had their community council, they had the neighborhood business district association, and they also had a community development corp, right? And the leaders of each of those groups did not get along. So if one person said something was purple, the other one was gonna say it was yellow. If someone said yes, the other one said no. And so I was charged to go in and get them to come on one accord. So the first couple meetings were very trying for me. I had to have a lot of patience because things that could be done or addressed in 1 hour, it took 3 hours. But I had to listen, and I suffered through that. And then I had to kind of take over the way it was going. And so what we did was I asked them each, what is it that you want for the community? And when they stopped and actually listened to each other, they really had the same end goal in mind. The issue was they had different ways to go about it, and they were coming from different perspectives. So what we did was I had them uh, to jointly do a survey of the community to see what the community wanted, and I partnered. No group of two people were from the same organization. or the same street, right? And so they went out, they brought the information back. It confirmed what they were saying. Now they're like, oh, okay. So it took a month or two, but they figured out they really care about the community. And I had to foster or facilitate that conversation. Now, what they did once they came together, once we got through that part, then the real work could start. So they took that survey, and because they did it themselves, it was low cost, right? We gave them technical assistance on the questions, and they went out, they brought it in, we compiled it for them, reported it out, and then that determined what were the top 3 priorities for the community. Each of those groups got small pots of money from the city of Cincinnati every year, whether it was for beautification, whether it was just some general operating dollars, and they could pick a special project. So they took those 3 projects. We did a whole complete kind of plan, what they were going to do to address it, right? And then they all applied, when they applied for their renewal of monies, they put those same 3 projects in. They pooled their money and they got the whole project done. So there was a corner and a business strip that was high in drug dealing, but that corner was also a major bus transfer point. And so first they took out the seating, but a lot of elderly used that stop. That was one that they used. So they put the seating back in there, but they took off, the cover so it wasn't comfortable for the drug dealers to hang out there like they waiting on a bus. Then they partnered with the police department, and they had beat cops on bikes who would come and kind of just be visible, right? Being regularly visible, building relationships with those in the area, but it made the drug dealers uncomfortable. Then they got lighting, they got some new pavers. And so this is an area where they might see 75,000 cars go past this 2-block area every day, in the morning and then again in the afternoon during rush hour. But cars weren't stopping because of the perception of the neighborhood. So by them making it uncomfortable, by them joining how they work together for the community good, not only did the drug dealers move out, right? They found somewhere else to go, but then the businesses, and they plan things for the businesses for now people to be able to stop in that neighborhood and support that local business ecosystem and just support the activities of the neighborhood. And that's still in existence today. So sometimes, even though it might be a racial, it might just be an agenda difference, right? And it's our job to kind of fester that out, find out the common ground and build up off of that.
Amber, there's another question, and it's a 4-H educator, and they're asking, do you have any advice on engaging youth? Or sorry, on keeping youth engaged?
Oh, yes. Okay. So even though I'm a CD educator, I have a strong background in youth development, especially with summer youth employment. So with that, engaging kids is making them leaders, right? So what you do is you ask them, what would you like to do? What are some of the things that interest you? And a lot of times, especially the teenagers, they might say, I don't know. But you ask the question anyway. Then you start giving suggestions. And then they'll start telling you, once you build up that trust, they'll start telling you kinds of things that they want to do. And then you make them leaders. Let them lead an activity. Let them plan an activity, right? And that's keeping them engaged. And you're keeping them engaged because, especially with 4-H, you have so many different activities that you can do. I don't think there's anything in that curriculum that doesn't touch somebody. And then in that youth spectrum. So you engage them, let them talk, listen, and then say, hey, let's do this, and let them help you plan what they're going to do. To give you an example, I was teaching some kids, and these were 16 to 20-year-olds, or 14 to 20-year-olds. And it was about 200 kids. and we wanted them to simply do their resume. I didn't care to start the process. I didn't care if they just wrote 2 sentences and said, I babysat. Turn something in, tell me something that you're doing, right? Well, a lot of the kids took it as a school assignment and they blew it off. So we got creative and said, hey, would you all agree to let us create, and I had 2 different classes, let us create a board of your peers. And so we took the kids and had them mini board development training. And we said, hey, this is the problem. The problem is you gave a work assignment, which was their resumes, right? And they didn't turn it in. They didn't meet the deadline. So how are you all going to solve the problem? And we already got the whole group to agree that whatever these boards said, that's what they had to do. So one group was ruthless, and they said, if you didn't have your assignment and you didn't turn it in by this extension deadline, which was, 12 o'clock that day, you may leave and you will not get paid for the rest of the day because this was paid time. Hit them in their pockets. I just knew I was going to get a bunch of calls from the parents. I only got a call from one parent. And then when I said what happened, they were like, oh, okay, right. But their pay got docked for that pay period about 6-7 hours. The other group said, hey, can you have the staff come in with laptops and work with those who haven't finished it, the assignment? So that's what we did. But what we did in doing so is we gave decision-making, they learned decision-making skills. They also learned what it's like to be a manager, right? When you got to make a tough decision, especially when half the people that you're making a tough decision about are your friends. So think about ways to engage them and put them in leadership positions. This past summer, the 4-H team, in conjunction with the CED team, we put together an Apple camp, coding camp for 12 days. And at the end of the 12 days, the kids had to do a presentation for Apple. And with that, one kid, the first day, said he didn't want to come back. He said, oh, this is beneath me. I know all of this stuff. And so I simply told him, well, I got plans for you. You are a leader. I saw how you were working today. So if you come back and give me a chance, I bet you'll get something out of it. He came back the next day. I wasn't expecting him to come back, but I said, but he came back. He ended up leading a presentation. He coached the other ones, and they in getting that presentation together. And he also would come to us for advice. So we became not this authority figure of a teacher. We became an advisor, someone they trusted. And that's how we engaged them in those short 12 days. And so we're looking forward to being able to work with them again. There's another question from, okay. Any tips to keep, wait a minute, you just moved it. It's from Miss Vicky. Basically, Miss Vicky was asking, when you need a translator, how do you keep the multilingual population, especially if you don't know that language, engaged? Well, one, you got to know what their culture is. So you got to be culturally competent. So, for instance, there may be there was a family that came into a hospital, and this was told to me. And the doctor automatically talked to the husband. But in their culture, when it came to healthcare and things concerning the family unit like that, they were supposed to talk to the wife, right? So that family shut down. But if he had knew that, he would have been able to keep them engaged. They got them back engaged and got the health care, but that was a major misstep, not recognizing. It's okay to ask, how would you like to be communicated with? I don't care what the language is, right? Or who it is. How do you want to be communicated? A lot of people say the golden rule, treat people like you want to be treated, but it's really the platinum rule, treat people how they want to be treated. because what may be good for you is not necessarily good for them. So just ask.
Amber, that was great. Olivia had another comment. She said, this discussion has been very helpful. Do you have any advice for additional training resources or organizations to learn more about inclusive extension outreach? And somebody said, yes, any helpful or any links, but we might be able to send the links with the video, the link to the video recording, if you can think of them later.
Okay, so one off the top is the emotional emotional intelligence and diversity, EID. And the website is EIDI-results.org. And I can put that in the chat if you want me to. That is based out of UCLA, and it takes emotional intelligence and it combines it with diversity. So emotional intelligence is more leaning on theory, right? But that diversity piece, when they added the diversity piece to EID, it gives you practical application. And one of the main things is you have your self-introspection, self-governance. Then it goes into how to build inclusive environments and social architecture. So I would say that is one of the top and best things to take, because it gives you not only able to manage your own emotions and how you communicate, but to recognize how other people communicate or need to be communicated to, and how to build inclusive environments, no matter whether you're in a workplace or a community. And I found that to be very, very helpful. And another thing that the three people who have kind of created that and honed it and improved it, they've been in that space doing that work for over 40 years. And like I said, it's based out of UCLA, but it is a center out of UCLA. And they are still at work, and it has extension aspects to it, as because one of the key PIs on that is actually a dual enrollment between a dual assignment between the center and extension. So that's why I said that is a very good model. Another good model, and this is more one of the personality things, but the Herman is HERMANN, is the Herman Whole Brain Dominance. And what that assessment does is it identifies where your strengths are on how you communicate and how you work in a perfect situation, but also how you communicate and work when you're under stress. And so when you're doing team building, it allows you to layer all those different personalities, right? And strengths. And if you whole brain it, that means you're balanced. And the 4 quadrants of that is yellow, which is kind of your visionary person, green, which is kind of that money person. So an accountant would be in that space. The blue is your process, and the red is your emotional, right? But if you have a balance, then you have a balanced team. So you need, even though somebody might be your complete opposite on how they work and how they think, in a team environment, that's important. And so recognizing those kind of things, you can apply it when you're working out in the community as well. The formal leaders in the community. Okay, so if there's a question that says, hi, do you have any tips on how to engage with the formal leaders in a community? And so, and whoever changed my name and thing, thank you, because I used Ambrose's login. So I was saying Ambrose, somebody said Miss Ambrose, but I'm Amber. But formal leaders, so it depends on their role. If they're a politician, to me, the politicians are the easiest to engage, because they have a platform that they advertise for them to get in the office. So you can look up, no worries, Miss Jennifer. I'm just saying, it was funny. I was Ambrose for a minute. That's okay. And you utilize what they say, that their promises, right? And that's your common ground, and that's how you get in. But when you're dealing with business leaders, don't think you can go in there making a moral case, because unless they had a personal experience around whatever you're trying to teach or reach or engage with, it's got to be a business case, right? So that's why you see a lot of counties going around saying about racism is a health issue, is a health emergency, right? They're making a business case so that that level of government can address some of those um, uh, issues. So when you're dealing with businesses, you just got to know your audience, like just in the community. You got to know what they stand for, and then you adjust your communication and what you're trying to do based on that. And that's where you start. Did that answer your question? Good, good, good. Are there any more questions, comments? Are there any other challenges that you may have in engaging the community? Oh, Miss Olivia said, do you have advice for engaging with communities during a time of crisis, natural disaster, pandemic, etc.? I realize extension often works during times of hardship. What precautions can be taken to navigate situations like this? First of all, you got to communicate, right? Second of all, you got to stay in your lane. So if you really can't, if you don't have the bandwidth or the wherewithal to help over here, that's not your lane to help. Sometimes one of the things that we can do, especially with the extension, is be a convener of all the different groups so that the work can get done. So just know what your strengths and weaknesses are and what your lane is and stay in that lane. But regardless, you have to communicate with all, you got to communicate. That is the key, and it's regular communication. One model that I've heard, and I wish it should to me be widespread, is that you can take the community, and a community can be a neighborhood, a city, a county, a group of counties. It's whatever is defined, which makes sense for that area, right? So a community, you have those leaders, and this is that disaster preparedness, right? Where everyone has a role and you have a communication system. And one of the key things is identifying who can go after grant money, disaster money, FEMA money, right? So that those applications can get in. Who is on first, who's on second when addressing it when there's a tornado. In Ohio, the middle part of Ohio, we get tornadoes. And if you're along, the Ohio River covers half of the state, and then we got Lake Erie at the top, right? So we get a lot of flooding. Even in Cincinnati, half part is the city that's along the river floods on a regular basis. So you have those kind of things, or things that you can do at a smaller community level with the community groups, because even though that might be a flood and impacting that area, that's not a natural disaster. It's not, the city's not going to say that's a disaster, right? Where they can bring in extra funding. So you have to identify what those resources would be needed ahead of time, and who's going to communicate what, and you have a system.
It looks like the real Ambrose asked how important trust was in all of this.
Trust is key, trust and communication. So you can't just go in there when there's a disaster. You have to start it in the beginning. If you don't have trust, and trust meaning is, I don't come in and say I'm going to do A, B, and C and then don't do it. You have to do whatever you commit to do. It doesn't mean I come in because I have more resources than that community or that group or that individual, and I dictate what they're going to do. So I have to be in that supportive role, and I have to stay in that lane, and that will build trust. Another thing that I do personally is some of the groups, especially with the urban ag, and I have covered at different points in time 27 different counties. So a third of the 88, almost a third of the states, the counties within our state. And so, but I'm being visible regularly. So when they have special events, even though it had nothing to do with work, or even if it did, it's after hours, I show up on a regular basis. And they say, oh, you came all the way up here. Yes, I came all the way up here because I support what you're doing. Even though I taught you last year, I see you implementing that. But I still want to support what you're doing. And what they do now is they refer other people to me. So a lot of my outreach is word of mouth. It's just word of mouth. I have to do a flyer for documentation purposes, but to get people involved and engaged is really word of mouth because we built up that trust. There's a question is how to mitigate a conversation if we accidentally disrespect the culture is first you apologize and then you ask, what is the proper way? You know, that wasn't my intent. What is the proper way so that I don't offend you again? It's just asking. A simple question, just being authentic and asking. So Iman Moore asked, do I have a handout with a breakdown of the reach, teach, engage model? No, but I will make sure I will put all of that in a model format and send it to you. And I'll send it to Dr. Marshall so she can send it out to everyone. So yes, there's no problem with that. And do you have any advice for someone who's introverted, may have trouble speaking to people, has social anxiety, but may have to interact with the community anyway in order to foster their network? Okay, so introverts, that is a hard one because believe it or not, people, because I'm kind of outgoing, I'm really a hybrid. So when I do talks like this or go to conferences, I mentally get myself prepared. These are things I want to talk about. And I physically get myself prepared. I talk to a mirror. I used to have stuffed animals. I used to collect teddy bears and I used to have them on the couch and I would talk to the teddy bears because that's people just looking at you without really responding, right? And you still got to be kind of upbeat. And then afterwards, I unplug, I put my feet up and I have a cup of tea and watch Netflix so that I can regroup and reconstitute myself and get and get my energy built back up because it does take energy out, especially when you are an introvert. And then another thing is when you're building those informal leaders or people, engage with small groups first, 1 or 2 people, and then build up from there. And that's how you foster that network. So you always just got to be prepared.
Well, thank you, Amber. I think this has been I know this has been a great presentation. Thank you for being so adaptable, even with the little technical difficulties. This has been a really engaging webinar. Sometimes we forget that actually just looking at somebody talk and not their PowerPoint can be very engaging, as you said. So you reached, you taught, and you engaged.
Yes.
So thank you very much. Thank you all for attending. We will be sending out the link with the webinar information. Our next webinar is October 25th. At 3:30, the title is The Role of Festival Volunteers in Supporting Rural Community Development, a Psychological Ownership Perspective. And our presenters will be from Iowa State. So again, thank you all for joining us. Yes, Amber.
Yes, well, we'll get the registration information for the October.
Yeah, yes, yeah, you'll get that. We will bombard you as always with our with our webinars that they're coming just to make sure everybody comes. So again, thank you, Amber, very much, and thank you all for attending. And we look forward to seeing you in October.